Hello, it's Stephen Bedard, and I want to address just a small part of the recent Southern Baptist Convention Task Force report that came out about sexual abuse. And so I need to put a few caveats out there. I am not a Southern Baptist. I am a Baptist, but not a Southern Baptist. And I really have not been closely connected with any abuse cases. I am not a victim of clergy abuse, and I don't personally know people who are victims of clergy abuse, clergy sexual abuse at least. And so I need to say that up front. But I do believe that there is something for me to say about this, and it's about a very specific aspect of the conversation that is going on. And I'm going to refer here to one of the Christianity Today articles about the report that came out. And this is what that article says. It says, the Southern Baptist Convention proudly says it's a group of autonomous churches. They join together for mission work, fellowship, and training, but the convention has no hierarchy. It doesn't ordain or appoint pastors, nor does it hold authority over the 47,000 churches that have chosen to affirm its faith statements and give to its cooperative program. The lack of oversight means that when something goes wrong in an SBC church or entity, the EC, that is the Executive Committee, can claim it's not to blame. The churches are independent. And this is one of the defenses that has been put out by some within the Southern Baptists, that when it comes to the sexual abuse that has taken place within churches and seminaries and other organizations connected to the Southern Baptists, that really that has nothing to do with the Executive Committee. It has nothing to do with the overall leadership of the Southern Baptists, because as Baptists, it's all about the local church. It's about autonomous churches. Each congregation, it's up to them to deal with whatever comes up, and it's not up to a denominational leadership to try to deal with those things. And as someone who is a Baptist by conviction, I wasn't raised in a Baptist church. I became a Baptist in my late 20s, but out of a belief that the polity of the Baptist church is something that has the potential for something that is very healthy, but unfortunately it also has the potential for some unhealthy practices as well. And so I want to address the idea that because of Southern Baptist polity, their hands were tied. There was nothing that they could have done to have made this situation any better. And I want to say that that is just a lie. The idea of the autonomous church does not get Southern Baptist leadership off the hook when it comes to this. So I want to just kind of carefully look at what this means. And first of all, I'm going to give you just some examples from the Baptist groups that I've been a part of, and how that might inform how we can understand how the Southern Baptists could have acted in a much better way to respond to sexual abuse. So as I said, I'm not a Southern Baptist. I was originally ordained with the Canadian Baptists of Ontario and Quebec, and I'm currently hold my ordination with our sister denomination, Canadian Baptists of Atlantic Canada. And so we also believe in the importance of the autonomous church, and we believe that it's not necessarily up to denominational authority to tell each individual congregation what to believe, and that I think is very important. So how that's worked out in the past in our Baptist group, at some point it was generally agreed, it was approved at an annual assembly that we would ordain women as pastoral leaders. And so that was approved denominationally. However, That doesn't mean that every congregation in the either of these groups that I've been a part of actually ordains women or is in favor of women in ministry. Some of those churches don't believe in that. They don't believe that women should be pastors. They will not ordain women as pastors. They will not hire women as pastors, and they might even preach that women should not be pastors. And our denomination does not discipline them for that. They are welcome to believe that. That is a part of what we value as the autonomy of the local church. Another more recent example has been in how churches should respond to the role of LGBTQ plus people in our churches. And there have been some of the more conservative congregations who have put forth motions that would enforce a certain stand for local congregations on what it means, how to include or not include LGBTQ plus people. And for some of those motions included ideas of not allowing membership and saying that people, LGBTQ plus people, were not eligible to be employed or anything like that. And those motions were defeated, not unanimously, but they were defeated largely, I think, not because of a fully affirming view of LGBTQ plus, although there were congregations that were in that camp, but more so about the idea of the autonomy of the local church, that many people did not want the denomination to say, this is who you're allowed to have as a member, this is who you're allowed to have in leadership or as an employee, and so on. So it was a matter of Baptist polity. So with that background in the experience that I've had in terms of these denominations, how does that fit for the Southern Baptists and sexual abuse? Did they have their hands tied? Could they have looked and say, well, we're getting reports here that there are pastors that are guilty of sexual abuse. We are getting examples of pastors and other leaders who are covering up sexual abuse, so they're aware of it, but perhaps they're protecting the abuser, and they may even be actively shaming the victims to avoid the truth of what was coming out. And so could the executive committee looked at that and said, well, it's unfortunate that that's happening, that, we have pastors and seminary leaders who are abusing and covering up abuse. It's unfortunate, but, they are autonomous churches. They are autonomous organizations. And so it's really not our business what they do. We should not really get involved in that. Well, that is not the case at all. Yes, it is true that because the autonomy of a church in a Baptist organization, that if the executive committee or any other leadership organization had come to a congregation and said, listen, your pastor is guilty of sexual abuse, and or they are guilty of covering up sexual abuse, or providing inappropriate, and I hate to even use this term, pastoral care in terms of counseling victims and telling them not to report, that they could have gone to those congregations and said that. And yes, a congregation could have said, well, we don't care. We love our pastor. We love our leadership. We don't believe the victims. And so we're just going to continue on. So yes, that would have been a possibility. And those congregations could have done that, and they could have continued to exist even if there had been that criticism from the Southern Baptist leadership. But there wasn't that criticism. There wasn't a willingness to stand up and say, this is wrong. And so the idea of using the autonomy of the local church to say that the Southern Baptists, especially the executive committee, but also the larger leadership of the denomination, to say that they couldn't do anything simply because the autonomy of the local church is just a lie. It is an absolute lie. There was all sorts of things that they could have done. When they were aware of these things, they could have made it public. They could have said, you know what? We have heard that this is happening, and we're going to take a strong stand because we believe that Jesus stands with the oppressed and the marginalized and the victims, and what is taking place by these leaders and the cover-up by leaders, that this is wrong, that it is evil, that it is of the devil, and we take a stand against that, and we call for righteousness and holiness and care and love and compassion and justice, and we stand for this. They could have done that. And maybe local churches wouldn't have listened. Maybe they would have. It's hard to know. It seems like in many cases that congregations didn't even know that these things were happening because it was being covered up by leadership on various levels. But the leadership could have said something. They could have said, this is what we're going to do. And it seems to be very clear that from the report that one of the main reasons that they did not do this was because of the potential legal ramifications. And so the part of that Christianity Today article that I read to you, the very next thing that was said is the legal counsel argued that the more denominational leaders directed churches to deal with abuse, the more it would assume liability for mistakes and mishandling. That the main role for the Southern Baptist denominational leaders to hold off and to not condemn what was going on was purely to protect themselves legally from lawsuits and any other responsibility that they might have had to take. That's not right. That's not a good excuse. But I would rather that they say that than to say, well, it's the autonomy of the church and we couldn't do anything. I would rather they just come out and be honest and say, you know what, we let it go because we didn't want to be overcome by lawsuits. We didn't want to be sued. We didn't want to be embarrassed and shamed in the court of law over what we had done. And so that's why we kept it quiet. At least that would be honest. I would much prefer that. It really has nothing to do with the autonomy of the local church. I will go so far as to say one more thing, and that is that the Southern Baptists have been very active in saying certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and trying to enforce that within churches to the best of their ability. So, for example, one very prominent example recently has been the stand of leadership against critical race theory, CRT. And so many people in leadership have pushed, saying that is wrong and that churches should not accept that. And in fact, if a church seems to be working too much against racism, that they would be accused of CRT and could potentially then find themselves on the bad side of the Southern Baptists for doing that, for holding to woke ideology by doing that. And there have been other things as well, other issues in which the Southern Baptists were willing to put the pressure on local congregations if they felt they were going in a direction that they didn't like. But there was a key difference here. The times when the Southern Baptist leadership did go after congregations for what they thought was wrong, they went against congregations and pastors and other leaders that they felt were drifting too far to the left, that they were becoming a little bit too liberal, that they were focusing a little bit too much on social justice, a little bit too much on racism, a little bit too much on the things that they considered to be the liberal agenda. And so it was time for the Southern Baptists to put some pressure on that. But when it came to sexual abuse, the problem was the people who were involved in the sexual abuse and the people who were involved in the cover-up of the sexual abuse were often on the conservative side. They're the people that the Southern Baptists didn't want to put pressure on. They were their greatest allies. They were the warriors for conservatism. How do you go up against them when they are the heroes of your attempt to become a more conservative Southern Baptist convention? It's easy to go after the liberals. Perhaps you don't even want the liberals in the convention, but those conservatives, they might be some of the most beloved people. And so in that case, it seems as if many people were willing to let it slide, and not only that, to actively cover it up so that they can continue in areas of authority and influence, because whatever they might do or think about sexual abuse, at least they were fighting for conservatism, and that's what was important. That's the impression that really comes out from this report. So in conclusion, all I want to say is, if you hear in this discussion about sexual abuse and the task force report and the Southern Baptists and all of these things, and people say, well, nothing could have been done because of the autonomy of the local church, I will tell you as a Baptist, that is a lie. That is not true. There was so much that the Southern Baptists could have done. They could have stood up for the victims. They could have exposed the abusers. They could have taken a stand for what was right, but they chose not to, and they're going to have to face the consequences of those choices. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you will visit me at my website, stephenjbedard.com, and I hope that you will pray for the Southern Baptist Convention. I hope that you will pray for the leadership, for all those involved, for pastors, for lay people, and especially that you would pray for the victims of the sexual abuse, victims who have been victimized twice, not just those who sexually abused them, but the leadership who came down upon them and shamed them and attacked them for their willingness to come forward with the truth. Please pray for them. Thank you, and God bless.